All right, guys, welcome back to the next episode of the Powerlifters Program and Podcast. A very warm welcome for John Song today. He is the coach of quite a few lifters, but today we're going to talk about Anthony McNaughton a lot. So I guess first, you just want to talk about how long you've been coaching Anthony, because I do believe you've been coaching him for a while, right?
Yes. So funny you ask, because I've been coaching him since he was in college, and he was in a fraternity. And the first half of the videos or check-ins that he would send me was him in a dark basement, and just him literally just like working out without any lights, just in a basement, some bumper plates, and he would often deadlift in the backyard of his frat house as well too. So I think he came to me with about like a 1,600 total at the time, and fast forward a couple of years later, I think he had like 500 or 600 pounds to his total. So, you know, obviously a genetic specimen, and also a very hard worker. So it's been a pleasure to coach him so far. But to give a little bit of a background of myself, it goes way back. So starting in high school, the thing that kind of got me started in powerlifting and weightlifting was wrestling. That was probably what I was obsessed with before powerlifting. And I would remember, like, I got to give a quick shout out to my wrestling coach, because I think at the time he was a cop for the MTA. And he would clock in some night shifts, work 12, 13 hours straight. And then he would come in and open the weight room for, oftentimes it'd just be one person, because there'd be people playing football occupied there. So a lot of times it would be just for me. And it's one of those things where, you know, you talk about inflection points and people who really change your life. And for me, that was him. So that kind of got me kickstarted into powerlifting coaching. I've been doing it for probably about, I think, like 12, 13 years so far. I started powerlifting when I was 15. And then I got really into coaching, I think, around like 2021 or something like that, right? Like probably a little bit too early, but you know, sometimes it's better just to get that experience out the way. And yeah, here we are now.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I had a brief coaching period, and I was maybe like 19 or 20, and I just had like really no idea what I was doing. And so now that I'm like coaching again, like 3-4 years later, it's a lot nicer. I can't imagine what it's like being you with all the experience you built up. But
it's yeah, like I agree, because it's like you never expect it to blow up, right? It starts out as a hobby, and this is something we'll probably get into later, but it's like, for me, I never really wanted to coach like those super elite high level lifters, because it's like that's a lot of, you know, pressure and spotlight on you. But it's kind of like a drug, right? Like, not that I've taken it. It's like a drug in the sense where it's like you coach a few high level lifters, and it's like you want to see, you know, more, and then just like go to all these high level meets and handle it. It's an experience in itself. So yeah, it's funny you mentioned, because Joe Stanek, who was a guest on your podcast multiple times, right? He was actually one of the first coaches that I've ever coached.
Oh, no way.
The craziest thing to me, because it's like he was so well established, and he was, you know, well into TSA, I believe, at the time. And just me having a roster of like 4 to 5 people, he had reached out, and I was coaching him for a couple months, I believe. So that's kind of a fun little fact.
Oh, that is super cool. Were you just like posting coaching content on social media and he reached out, or how'd that happen?
So that's the thing. As you can probably tell from my Instagram account, I don't really post much. And I think he kind of discovered me from me coaching a couple of his friends that had went to, not the same school, because he went to Syracuse, I believe, but a couple of my friends that went to Cortland. So Luke Graham, Brian Loskamp, there were people who did obviously really well. And I think he just kind of he was curious what was going on. Mm-hmm.
Hey, cool enough. It worked out. Speaking of people who do not post much, it is really hard to get a read on Anthony's training, because the guy just does not post at all. He didn't even post that 260 bench at all on Instagram, I don't think. I saw it on like his YouTube channel. So it's kind of hard to study up on him. I think a lot of people, like, you coach Angelo. Angelo posts like everything. People have a good idea what his training structure looks like. But just like before we get into the in-depth questions on Anthony, could you just give like a brief overview of what his split looks like?
Yeah, so this is one of those things that I talk about, which is adaptability within, you know, what someone's doing outside of powerlifting. So for those who don't know, Anthony is obviously in that stage of his life where he's looking for, you know, like a full-time career, getting into coaching as well too. And for him, like, the biggest struggle was trying to balance, because he was looking to get into the fire department and then also become a police officer as well too. And he would be running, at sometimes maybe like 15, 20 miles a week. And this was in the midst of Arnold prep and then going into PA Nats prep as well too. So a lot of what we're doing today is to essentially accommodate for what he was doing back then when he had to really make time to run and also be productive inside the gym. So what we would do is we would have probably like a secondary squat bench session, right? We'd have another bench press session. And then Wednesday would be his SBD day where he's hitting all of his heavy lifts. And then right after that session, he's going for like a very, very long run, probably his harder run. And the rest of the week going into maybe like Saturday or Sunday would be time for recovery, essentially, right? And the goal there was I want to give him the maximal time to recover between sessions. And I think along the way, we ended up actually finding a couple programming things that really stuck. Because it's kind of one of those cases where it's like you find things out on accident almost. And then we realized during this time period, like, hey, like your last primer bench session is Wednesday, and your heaviest bench press session is Saturday. And, based on all the recent stuff with programming coming around, especially with the, golden microcycle, a lot of people are saying like 48, 24, 48 hours between bench press sessions. This guy was doing almost 72. So, and for him, it's like, this is the strongest his bench has ever been. And we kind of came to the conclusion like, hey, if you're a bigger guy, longer range of motion, a lot of muscle mass, lifting a ton of weight, you might just simply need a couple extra days of rest before you hit your heaviest bench, right? And a lot of his program was dictated around that. Another surprising thing for most people is I think he talked about it on a podcast as well too, where he's actually only hitting one set of sumo per week. So his top set is his only set of sumo, right? Sometimes it'll be one rep. He'll do back downs, RDLs, and on a secondary day, he's doing conventional. And that seemed to work really well because for whatever reason, when he's running, his hips don't feel the best. His hinge doesn't feel great enough to like really push his sumo, at the top end. So for him, like just giving him a slight exposure and then really backing off, but also getting an appropriate stimulus has worked really well. And I think that is really what drove his deadlift from maybe like a mid 771 puller all the way up to now he's probably capable of upwards of 816 plus.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. The sumo once a week or the one set a week. So you have the RDL backoffs. And is it like you're making up a lot of volume on the RDLs of the conventional, or is the whole weekly setup pretty low volume?
So I'm going to kind of flame him here. I don't think he's that great at accessories. So he came to my basement once, right, to like kind of work out in my home gym that I have. And like after his bench and deadlift, he was like, all right, man, it's time for me to leave. I'll see you later. I'm like, wait, don't you have, feet up dumbbell press and incline press as well too? It's like, we have that here. Like you can have adjustable dumbbells. They go up to like 125. And the guy was putting up like 70 pounds on incline dumbbells. And he was trying to add a pause to it, a little bit of a tempo. And I'm like, you got to be like, have you been doing 70s this whole time? And it's like, at that point, we're like, 2 weeks out from PA Nats. And I'm like, you know what? Don't change it. Like, keep doing this. Next week, I'm going to specifically, for your peak week, I'm going to program 75-pound dumbbells. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's like, he ended up hitting like some crazy PR of like 30. It was a 30-pound meet PR, 540 on meet day. That was also a revelation for me because I was like, you know what? Some of these bigger guys, like I know as a whole, the powerlifting community is really pushing accessory work, but it probably gets to a point where it becomes redundant if, the intensity that you're able to hit on a dumbbell compared to a, competition bench press is so different. So for him, he kind of just uses it as maybe like quote unquote movement variability. But just kind of getting back to your question of the stiff legs, right? Like for the RDLs, he's not really pushing them super hard. Maybe at most he's doing like 260, but that's like once a block, right? And given he's like an 800 puller, like most of the time he's spending time in that like 485 to like 551 range with RDLs. So not really much, right? Like I've seen sub 700-pound pullers do the same thing as well too. So
yeah, I think that's interesting because like as you're say like you look at a lifter and like, all right, your rear delts are way smaller than your quads. They might recover a little bit quicker. Eventually, when you get huge, like a jacked 105 that's benching most people's deadlift, your chest might take a similar time as quads, glutes, hamstrings to recover. So that definitely makes sense. Let's go back in his career a little bit, because adding like 500, 600 pounds to a total is like absolutely insane. I was looking on his Instagram trying to find out exactly when you guys started in this open powerlifting, trying to find the correlation, but I couldn't. So I'm glad I asked that, because I saw you coached him to his first like 900 kilo total and a little bit before that. And obviously, like, you're gonna be at the 1,000 kilo total soon. He probably could have done it his last 2 meets. So like way more progress than I even realized. It's really cool, man.
It's I think, to be specific, if you look at his lifting cast, the last USPA meet he ever did, that was like essentially after that he transitioned with me. And before that, he was getting coached by Luke Graham, who was also a previous athlete of mine, but he was going into the military, and beforehand he just gave me all of his lifters and I adopted them.
Nice. That's awesome. You were like, man, you got to get over into the USAPL at that point, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of his choice at that point. Like, I wasn't really someone that pushed people either or, because I was actually competing USPA at that time too. So for me, I was pretty open-minded, like, whatever you want to do. I just saw a crap ton of potential with him. I think one of his craziest things that I saw early on was him hitting 405 for 10, I think, Larson. And it's like, I'm like, dude, you're going to be totaling something crazy. And it's like, he's such a humble dude that he never believed anything I said, like truly did not believe it. And then a couple of years later, look at, where he is right now. So
yeah, that 405 for 10 Larson's crazy. I've been doing Larson yet, but not that close. So I'll just stay.
You're up there, man. I've been seeing some of your lifts, so
thank you, man. Thank you. So let's just start with his bench, I guess. Has he always been doing this lower volume, lower frequency relative to other lifters' bench setup, or has it kind of changed over his career?
Yeah, so the biggest inflection point for his bench press, and this is a pretty specific event, is every once in a while, like when I see a big discrepancy between what a lifter is putting up in the gym and then also, what they're hitting on the platform, I have to kind of raise a question of like, what are we missing, right? So he would oftentimes hit 529, 535, right, inside the gym, and it's like, on meet day, there would be like nothing. It'd be like 507 would be an RP9, and then maybe a 512, 518. So looking at his program, kind of the same thing, right, with dumbbell press, where it's like his sets of 7, sets of 8, and it's like, to be fair, it's fairly high volume, right? If you're a 540-pound bencher and your back downs are 275, right, like there's a huge discrepancy. So I was like, every good program, right, if you kind of just break it down, it has some sort of high intensity work, some sort of moderate intensity work, and you have your lighter work. And the big gap for us was the moderate intensity work. So I was like, listen, man, on your secondary days, tertiary days, like whatever, like let's just see if we can push the throttle a little bit. What happens to your bench? And I think he went from like 275 for 7, and then eventually he was hitting like 405, 415 for back, like straight sets back down. And I'm like, do you feel all right? Like, are you getting hurt? Like, your pecs feel beat up? He's like, nope, I feel great. All of a sudden, he's taking like 507 for sets of 3 on his secondary day. And it's like, we had this huge potential of rising going into PA Nats, because we made this discovery going into PA Nats with his, tune-up meet that he did. And we made the adjustment in about like 10 to 12 weeks. And his bench literally shot up to like a 540 RP, probably like 8.5 on meet day, with a good amount more. And then what we rode from then into Worlds is we knew that, like, okay, with a quick turnaround time, there might be programming adjustments that needed to be made on squat and deadlift. But for him, the bench, we just kind of rode whatever momentum that he needed, right? So on the day that he hit 573 or 260, his last warm-up was 250. So to be able to PR your bench by 5 kilos and then PR it again, it just shows like how much more potential is there. At IPF Worlds, obviously, like, Susie Gary being the handler, I was pretty transparent to her. I was like, listen, we hit 260 in the gym. It was comp standard. It looked great. I just don't know how battle tested it is, because his last heavy bench in a meet was 245, and there's obviously a big discrepancy. So we knew that about 240-ish should be a second attempt. And the third attempt, we kind of just, whatever you see on the bar that's available, go for the safe jump. And that's how we kind of worked on the attempt selections on meet day.
Yeah, he nailed the third attempt as well. It looked like he had maybe close to that 260. I don't know what you were thinking.
So he personally reported that it was just the right call in the third attempt because he's one of those lifters, like it goes really fast and then out of nowhere he hits a wall because he's such a clean lifter, right? And you'll see that with the squat as well too, right? On his second attempt, it looked like he had a ton more of the tank, then he has to sink it more, and it obviously did slow down a bit. So I want to say he probably had like 5, an all-out grind, maybe 7.5. So right in the ballpark of what you were kind of implying.
Okay, cool. Did you have any of these other inflection points, as you call them, on squat or deadlift?
Definitely deadlift. So we had him on a 2 times a week sumo deadlift layout before, and I can't like really create a good reason other than when he was pulling twice a week, we were seeing things that we would never see before on his technique. Like he would stay down there, like kind of do, like he has this thing where he kind of just hinges, grabs a bar, flows right into it. When everything gets super heavy, where he's like hitting like 705 on a secondary day and then like whatever on his primary day, there starts becoming too much overlap. And we've tried the approach where we simply go lighter as well too. But there's a lot of technical breakdown for him. And I think for as a lifter, that creates a lot more inhibition as well too, right? Because he starts doing some like double pumping at the bar, like staying down there too long, missing on grip because he's down there for so long, overthinking his grip. Heck, there was even a time where he sent me a hook grip video. And I was like, immediately no. Like that was the worst thing I've ever seen. I'm like, you are a talented mixed gripper. Please don't ever show me that again. So yeah, like I would say that was the big inflection point. And again, a lot of this happened by accident, right? Mm-hmm. I think flat out, like after a meet, he's like, hey, I want to try conventional. And this is one thing where I try to be open-minded because you can make a lot of discoveries if you're just open-minded. You know, obviously, timeline willing, you don't have a meet coming up and you're experimenting. So I was like, all right, cool. Let's just try pushing your conventional on the secondary day. Not like anything crazy, but just, you know, rep it out because you get some posterior chain stimulus there. And let's just progress it throughout the block. And it was a great result, right? I think there's something to be said about keeping a conventional deadlift in a program for a lot of these heavyweight lifters that tends to help their capacity or just maintain their capacity to hinge that you normally wouldn't get with maybe something like a 2 times a week sumo layout. Lastly, for squat, so there wasn't like too many inflection points because he's always been a pretty good squatter, I would say. The only thing is like he will get flat on me pretty quickly. So knowing how to dose his secondary day has been the biggest thing for us, right? Like he can, like right now he is kind of going a little bit overboard on his secondary days, but you know, it's post meet, you can push some stuff if you need to. But what tends to happen, you know, on a peak is either he goes too light, which is what happened on the tune-up meet going into PA Nats, where he had SSB in his secondary day, and the intensity only amounted to like I think like 600, 625, and the squat just didn't look great, right? Because kind of like that previous conversation we had, where I think he was missing a lot on his moderate intensity work by doing SSB squat, and then we subbed that for a low bar. We bumped that to about, you know, an end point of 672 for sets of 5, like a top set of 5 going into PA Nats. That ended up being his taper week, so just 672 for a couple of reps, and then boom, like that led into his primary day, which is his meet day. So for squat, I would say it's mostly just being able to accurately gauge where his secondary day has to be for his primary to feel like he can really dunk his squats and also feel strong.
Okay, yeah. And when you say sometimes he goes flat on squat pretty easily, I've heard different coaches describe it a little bit differently. Sometimes they just use this like catch-all phrase where it could mean they're doing a little bit too much or maybe they're understimulated. Could you describe a little bit more what you mean by that and what happens in his primary day?
So Anthony specifically, I would describe flat as in he has to tempo his squats. He doesn't have a good spring out of the bottom position. So either he's under-recovered or he's underdosed to the point where he can't move well. And for him, it's like a completely different ballpark because it's like he has to make his squat look a certain way to get favorable calls, especially at the world level. Right. So I feel like at the world level, it's not enough just to hit depth. Right. You have to make it almost look like a high bar Olympic type squat, right? Where you have to almost like crash a little bit, dive bomb, and really make it convincing. For him to be able to do that, he also needs a certain amount of fullness in his legs, right? And at the same time, he can't be too under recovered in his lower back, because if he's unable to break correctly on the squat, it's just going to be a tempo. He's going to slow down and he's going to cut it. So that's kind of what I mean for him. In general, I kind of refer to being flat as just not having the appropriate level of stiffness to feel strong. So it's kind of the opposite, right? If I'm using it more as a general term, I'll probably describe it as just not having the adequate level of stiffness, or just lift specific stiffness, right? Because stiffness can be everywhere, to efficiently spring out of the hole on squat and also feel strong.
All right, thank you for the clarification. I have that myself personally on squat too, where if I'm dosed improperly one way or the other, just like descending on a squat, I have no confidence. I feel like I'm getting crushed. Definitely almost turn everything into like a pause tempo squat. You don't get that bounce, which feels so helpful.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, like that's one of the talking points that I've been having with a lot of coaches lately, which is, powerlifting obviously is revolved around like trends and what everybody, like metas, right? Like similar to a video game. What is everybody using right now and how are they progressing? I think, especially for squatting and also bench press, it's almost gone too far to the point where we're so worried about getting this ideal time frame of when someone's going to be perfectly primed for a squat. And we start almost overlooking that, hey, we also need to factor in recovery is a very real thing. Right? There might be even a case where, depending on a certain population, whether it's, maybe it's even people who are coming back from injuries, I might prioritize recovery over priming, right? And it's like, there has to be a balance of both, because if you have the perfect schedule for priming and then they only feel good once a week out of the block, you're missing the mark, because you're missing about 75% of the block in terms of productive training. So that's definitely one thing I have to consider, especially with the bigger guys as well too, where it's like, sometimes because of the sheer amount of weight they're moving or their work capacity, they just have to have more separation between the days.
Yeah, that's a super good point. You obviously want to be primed on meet day, but if it's some blocks out and you're not recovering, it's not going to lead to that effective of a meet day anyway. And obviously you gotta strike the balance, of course, what you're saying. I was oversimplifying it, but I think that's very, very important to strike the balance. You were talking actually a little about injuries. So that's a nice little segue. Whenever an athlete comes to you injured, how do you, I'm sure this varies between athletes, between lifts, the injury, but how do you go about adjusting the actual like powerlifting program? Is that something where you cut it out for a while, replace the exercises, try to keep it similar with low weights and build them up? Or how do you prefer to go about that?
So for me, I kind of use this 3-lens approach or 3-bucket approach, where I keep an open mind, right? Like whenever someone comes into my Zoom consults, I take a look at just 3 different categories, which is movement options, their technical proficiency, and also their load management capabilities. And that would obviously encompass programming as well too. And after they give me a little bit of a background on everything that, kind of like they've been going through and just what they've been doing programming wise, and also taking a look at their lifts as well too, I try to just see like what stands out to me the most. Oftentimes, it's usually a blend of each different category that we have to intervene upon. And in my opinion, I think that just makes it a little bit more effective too, right? Because if someone came into my meeting, right, and then I just gave them a couple of drills and told them, hey, like, just figure it out, come back to me in a week, maybe that would work, right, if it's specific enough. But I find that just having a little bit more control as a whole, like just seeing what stands out, even from a technical efficiency standpoint, right? What is this lifter changing as a result of pain, or how are they moving? And I'll also take a look at their programming. Like most of the time, I try not to change the programming, because if I'm doing a good enough job educating the patient and also giving them whatever they need, they probably don't have to change the program. But if it's a coach that I'm really not familiar with, or maybe I just see it in that lifter that, hey, like this, whatever layout they're on currently, it's just getting stale, they're tired of it, they want to try something new. And if it's going to help the overall process of them feeling better, I'll also do that as well too. So I'll also include the 4-week training blocks with the consultations as well too. That way I have as much control and we can control for as many variables as possible.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah, you're like the hands down go-to guy. Anytime you hear of a powerlifter like gets an injury, I feel like I always hear them go to you. I couldn't name one other PT that's like a powerlifting coach. So you have a very niche, very helpful space.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's like, again, it's a space that really like there were people doing it before, but nobody really identified themselves as like a powerlifting, physical therapist. So it's cool that, it's grown. I think powerlifting is one of those spaces, like even with the mentorship calls nowadays, like this was never a thing, right? And it's like, you see just these trends pop up. And I think I was fortunate enough to network with a few close friends and coaches that really got my name out there. And then that really helped kickstart everything.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I'm in the process of something similar, so hopefully it pans out for me.
Are you in PT school as well too?
No, I meant with talking with another coach.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, I can fill you in after. But what are some common mistakes that you see that lead to injuries? It could either be just from like an athlete perspective or a coaching perspective. Like maybe they're programming and they're changing things up too much, or just athletes not prioritizing whatever variables enough.
All right, so this is going to be a little bit more general, but I think important as well too, because obviously you have the lifter that overshoots, they do too much and they can't recover, right? At the end of the day, like nothing can replace the fact that a lot of these injuries happen because we're either doing too much or our work capacity is too low to tolerate anything, right? And whether we're giving them drills, technical modifications, or modifying their program, it is to address that. We need to optimize their recovery, so whatever workload they're under right now, they can actually recover from, right, and perform well. So I would say 9 times out of 10, right, like if a lifter comes to me, most powerlifting coaches are pretty, they're aware of what they need to do for low-level injuries, right? I see a lot of cases where a lifter is injured, it's a chronic injury, and what actually happens is we start pulling back, training volume, right? And that might be a temporary solution, but it goes on to the point where now we have a lifter that's doing one top set, one super easy back down set, and that is their session for the week. And if that works, great, right? But if you're someone like middle of the road powerlifting career, like you haven't been doing this too long, and that is your total training volume for the week, and then maybe you have some like BS like secondary day, your work capacity is extremely, extremely low. So it's like, because we labeled this as a programming issue, when in reality it might have been a biomechanics issue, something with movement variability, or something where it's a patterning issue, we've essentially just misdiagnosed the whole thing, right? And it's like, now it's like you've stripped away so much training volume that they're going to be more prone to these injuries in the long run, because now we can never progress from that. Like, how do you progress a 1x1 and a 1x5 back down, right? It's very difficult. And that's that's probably one of the most common cases that I see, which is why I have a lot of coaches doing the biomechanics mentorship as well too. And this kind of just gives them a different lens to look at when they look at their lifters training as a whole, not just from an injury perspective, but it gives us more tools in the toolbox that you can work on.
Yeah, I fell into that mistake myself. So both of my injuries have been like very minor tears, but I had a minor pec tear, rehabbed that like pretty quick, was good to go within like 2 months hitting PRs. But my quad, I tore that, just being an idiot. I was like training with like absolutely no sleep. So I just wasn't recovered. And I wasn't doing any squatting because like I could like hardly walk. So I was just doing like very basic graded exposure, easing back into moving. And after a couple of weeks, I think after about 6 weeks, I was like pretty much 100%. I was doing like leg extensions to like failure, leg press to failure. It was time to squat again. Started squatting, being nervous. I like was afraid to really actually do a proper workout. So like my volume and my intensity just pulled way back. And even though I was like pretty much healed after 6 weeks, it's been like 7 months now. It was just like it lingered. And then finally in the last like month, I was like, I think like my work capacity is absolutely just horrible. And that's kind of making my quad linger. And now as I've actually like increased that and pushed my workloads higher, I'm able to push sets, like my accessories, and push them to failure with no pain at all. And that's actually cured me finally.
Yeah. And it probably sucked. Like if you're that detrained and you're building up that work capacity again, like it feels like you're doing the worst thing, right? Like it's like, I don't know if this is really productive. I'm probably going to stay injured. But then you eventually get to a point where it's like, again, I think a lot of people have made the point recently of just saying that like we've gotten so attached to the golden microcycle to the point where we start losing sight of like, hey, like if we're going to get stronger, we have to do more in a couple blocks than we're doing now. Doesn't matter how fast that rate of progression is, but it's like you're not going to get strong doing the same thing over and over again. Right. So at a kind of like a microscopic level, kind of going back to your topic, right? You see this a lot with pec tears as well too, or pec strains, right? How often do you see like a lifter that's doing 4 times a week bench press, and it might be grade 1 strain, something that might not warrant a complete pullback in everything that you're doing, but it's like just to play it on the safe side. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because yes, there's definitely a population where it's like, if you don't trust your lifter and you know that they're going to overshoot, yes, you might have to pull back a couple of days and do something else, right? But I think a lot of this happens prematurely. So what you get is like someone who's benching 4 times a week, they strain their pec on Monday, and they're like, all right, let me just take the rest of this week off to heal. And it's like next week they feel great. Session 1 feels really good. And they're like, wow, I could probably hit a PR right now. Well, no shit, you just went through a deload, right? And it's like the second session, it's like, oh, wow, like I'm a little under recovered. Like I didn't expect to be that sore from session 1. And it's like now you're in this hole of recovery, and it's like, boom, a couple sessions down the line, you could potentially make that issue 5 times worse than what it was, right? Because you've essentially removed all work capacity in that week, bench detrained extremely quickly. And I see this case a lot where it's like it started as something minor, and because of like just poor programming choices, it compiled into something greater.
That's what I felt like my case was exactly. Like I think back and I'm like, man, I probably should have booked a consult with you, because I would have been hitting squat PRs months ago.
Exactly.
6 weeks to 6 months, but that's okay. And I think it's very true, because like when you're going through that process of pulling back a ton, you're like, man, like this hurts and I'm squatting once a week, barely. If I push more, like, is it just going to go horribly? And it could, but then you got to very slowly ease into that as the tissue allows. Otherwise you might make it worse. Exactly like you're saying, the person that takes the week off of bench. I know one of my friends recently, he strained, or maybe a minor tear, I'm not exactly sure, with his pec right whenever he upped to 3 times a week frequency. And then like 2 weeks in, had something happen, took a bunch of time off, got back into it, and just immediately flare up after flare up, just because that cycle was happening.
Mm-hmm. And you saw this a lot during COVID as well too, where it's like, I mean, this is kind of a separate topic, but sometimes it maybe not even like a load management thing, right? Because how many times have you seen like during COVID, like, oh, you know what, at least I can take a couple of weeks off to rest because all the gyms are closed and maybe all my injuries are going to heal up. And it's like, you realize that a pattern, no matter how much you deload, is probably going to still, like, even if you're walking, a certain movement pattern is still prevalent, right? Like whatever restrictions you're dealing with. So what would happen is, like, COVID lockdowns were done, gyms were open again, and people get the same exact injury after the first block back, right? And it's like, that's something to be said about, like, maybe a lot of the times this isn't a programming issue or even like a volume thing. You might just have a rate limiter, which is, maybe your movement options on one shoulder compared to the other is so limited to the point where you can't tolerate a lot of work, right? You see this with a lot of people who have disc herniation type symptoms as well too. They get this compression in their hips, their lower back, and it's like the initial pain goes away, but you've never addressed that compression and allowed them to move freely afterwards. They just keep riding that same pattern, whether they're sitting, bending over, walking throughout the day. That cycle just keeps getting reinforced unless you have something to break that cycle up.
Okay, so what you're kind of saying here is like, you could have something that's lingering that's kind of like a bottleneck for your training. Even if your squat volume is fine, that might just bottleneck you before you can actually get to an appropriate level of volume where your other muscle groups might not be able to handle it. Exactly,
because like a lot of the people that I get, like they're from Marcellus, Steve Novi, Sean Norrigan. It's like they're brilliant programmers. They all know about technique. It's like the one thing I might have is just access to more drills or just like corrective exercises, and it's like, why would I waste my time doing the same things that they probably already tried coming to me? Maybe I might have some different insight, but it's like, I find that a lot of times, especially if I'm getting lifters from a lot of these like, well-established, just high-level coaches, it requires a little bit more specificity and a different lens, which is why, like, the past year, I had a mentorship with Corey Hecht, who's an absolutely brilliant physical therapist. And it's like, he really opened up and just refined a lot of just like the previous concepts that maybe weren't, so clear to me, and just really explained a lot of what he does. And that just helped, again, just put a lot more tools in my toolbox.
That's something that I want to learn more about. Obviously, like, I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not going to go too crazy with that stuff, but just in my own my own training, or like my wife trains too. Whenever like a little niggle, nothing big pops up, just knowing what drills to do. I saw, I can't remember who it was. Someone posted the other day that they were doing some drills and like instantly helped. I'm like, man, I need to learn those. Do you have any good like resources for people?
So I like Zach Couples. Bill Hartman is a great resource as well too. Connor Harris, like he puts out very digestible material. So all really good resources. They have free resources as well too on YouTube and also their own websites. But yeah, like I would say, like, you know, I noticed you said just you're not a PT, but it's like it's your body at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I'll say this: if a PT ever gets mad at like you learning that stuff or like teaching it to others, it's probably an ego thing.
Mhm.
Like it's your body, you have the right to learn the most about it and take care of yourself. So the information's out there. It's really just a matter of processing it and finding utility.
Okay, sweet. I will definitely look those people up. I'll appreciate that. Thank you. With that being said, let's hop into Angelo, because I think whenever he came to you, he was kind of dealing with, was it a back thing?
It ended up being, so initially I thought it was some sort of like a mid-back compression or some sort of like a rhomboid strain. But in hindsight, I have a feeling it might have been actually something disc related in his either neck, cervical spine, or thoracic spine, right? Just because it happened in a way where there was just a lot of patterns that didn't follow a specific category, right? Like it wasn't just, oh, whenever he activated or lengthened his rhomboids, that's when it hurt, right? It would hurt like getting off the bench, right? Unracking a squat, re-racking a squat, and it's like letting the bar down on a deadlift. It's like these things were very atypical, and for me, like midway through, I'm like, wow, this sounds a lot different than just a rhomboid strain, and we also changed our approach as well too. It was a lot of technical stuff, right? Because this is one of those things where it's like I'm creating that bucket list in the back of my head. I'm seeing what stands out to me the most. And for him, it was technique, right? He was doing something on the squat where it caused his upper back to just pitch a really, really like drastic amount to the point where out of the squat, he was essentially just using all of his like tinier, just like upper back muscles in his neck to extend out. And it's like the second you start allocating just all that weight, like hundreds of pounds, into these tiny muscle groups when really they should be stabilizing and holding position. And instead they're going into a position where they're bending and then having to extend a ton. That's a lot of leverage, right? So we essentially addressed that pattern, and then it ended up fixing everything else as a result because he didn't have pain squatting, right? That was the catalyst essentially, right? Then the deadlift started cleaning up, and then eventually he was able to set up and bench the way he wanted to. So yeah, that was kind of like the big driver there.
That's super cool. I never would have thought that something that, I mean, quote unquote small, even though it isn't, it would just drastically bleed its way into everything. Speaking of like disc issues, I feel like that's something that, you know, is very fear mongered, whether it's rightfully or not. I guess you're going to tell us in a sec. But for, you know, power lifters, because of squats, deadlifts, is that something that the average power lifter needs to really be super worried about? Like if they do have a disc issue, is that kind of game ending? Is it not as scary as they think? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, like it's one of those cases where there's a lot of different research studies. There's a lot of different physical therapists that have already broken this down. So to keep it short and sweet, what I would say is like, there's a lot of evidence showing that if you have a disc herniation, you might not even present with the symptoms, right? You might not even be in pain. And it's like, at that point, does it really matter? Right? Like if you have it, it's slight and it's like it doesn't affect anything that you do, it doesn't really matter. Right? And if it is a case where it's like you have all the symptoms, right? There's also studies showing that you can have, you know, 5 out of the 5 criteria for a disc herniation and you don't see anything on the MRIs. Right? So ultimately, like as physical therapists, like my job is to essentially address the patterns and address what is causing your pain and how can we make your day-to-day life better. Right. And as powerlifters, the heaviest thing we do day to day is squat, bench, and deadlift. Right. So it's like we have to clear those patterns first. And I don't know what's going to happen at the physiological level after that. There's a pretty good chance if nothing inside the gym hurts, right, or is at least tolerable, you're on the right track. So that's kind of what I strive for. Whenever I use disc herniations in language, that's simply just to have a conversation with them. I never try to fear monger. I always say, hey, like, I'm just using this phrase because this is pretty much just describing the quality of your pain, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have it, right? And I think once you start using that type of language with people and not fear mongering, you create better outcomes too. It's just better overall.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have a herniated disc, but you have no pain in your day-to-day life and you just pulled like an 800-pound PR, who really cares as long as you're staying injury-free going forward as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
I kind of have like two more general questions for you, programming. They're not actually, sorry, I totally blanked. I do have one more on Angelo for you.
Of course.
So he's made a lot of progress, especially on his squat since coming to you. Has that really just been like we cleaned up the lift efficiency, we cleaned up the back issue, and then his squat just propelled forward from that? Or have there also been some programming changes that have helped propel him forward?
So programming changes, we switched from 2 times a week squatting to 3 times a week squatting, just for the simple fact that like by the time he got into his primary, which is on Friday, it just never like looked good. It seemed like he'll try to play it off like he's not, but he's very technical. Like he's not just a get up to the bar and lift it type of guy. Like he's a very technical lifter. So a big part of it along the way too is like I'm giving him specific things to work on to make sure that at every time and place he knows where to be. And it's like that's probably like a little bit of an exaggeration, right? Like because when you get good at technique, when you get good at squatting, benching, or deadlifting, you eventually get to a flow state where maybe you think of 1 or 2 things, and that is the goal, right? But when we are repatterning something and wanting to, essentially raise the ceiling for what he can handle, we're going to spend a little bit more time with technique. We again moved him to 3 times a week. And same case with Anthony as well, too. Angelo's the type of person where it's like he has to get pretty darn close to a 5-rep max on his secondary day to move anything in that mid to like low 700s on squat. Like that has been proven time and time again. Like that is essentially what unlocks his squat strength. So a lot of it is just the education piece of it where it's like, hey, weeks 1 through 3, you're not going to feel that great, but it's like, that's fine. We shouldn't really change much. And it's like, we should just work on the little things, just, working on our execution. So to answer your question, I think a lot of it was just consistency, right? Like once we identified what keeps getting him injured, what is preventing him to fight through those sticking points on the squat, right? And spoiler, it's a lot to do with his head position and just not over cranking it back as you see sometimes he does, and just keeping it consistent, right? So for him, once we did that, he trained for 10 to 12 months, pain-free, not having to skip a single session because of an injury or pain. And even when he does have pain, we're able to just work around it and still end the block with really nice numbers. So I think it was a lot of just consistency, not really over changing anything, and just building up over time, like just progressive overload.
Whenever you changed him from that 2 to 3 times a week squatting, was he really coming into that primary feeling good because of extra technique practice from the extra day? Like maybe you got the volume and you kept it similar and just split it up over the week? Or were you really actually like adding additional volume in on that day, just more stimulus in total?
Yeah, so I knew relatively speaking, he was already doing a pretty good amount of volume to begin with because he's extremely consistent. So he'll do like a 600 top set and then mid 5s for back downs. And it's like every single rep, there's no breakdown. It's all legs and it looks great. So I knew like whatever, and this is the thing, like when you make changes, the biggest thing I do is I just take a step back and look at the goal. Like what is he missing right now? And he expressed it, technique, efficiency, he doesn't feel primed. So for me, I'm like, it doesn't make sense to put a boatload of volume on this day, right? So it's like the only thing that makes sense is a couple singles, super sub maximal. And that's also a great way to warm up for a secondary deadlifts as well, too. So it kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone there. And yeah, I mean, like it wasn't much, but it was enough to make him feel really good on his primaries.
Okay, cool. That kind of goes into like one of the more broad questions I had for you. You're kind of talking about it perfectly. Is whenever you're working with a new athlete, how do you go about dosing them appropriately? Just total workload that could include like volume, frequency, intensity. How do you just find that sweet spot for them?
Yeah, so again, kind of going back to like how I program is very similar to how I treat. I think especially in an age where there's so many different programming strategies. You have powerlifting now, a bunch of people posting content. it's easy to get caught up into that as well too, and just say, hey, I'm just going to do what the next best coach is doing, right? And just copy them. But I create that needs analysis of what does this person in front of me need, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and then how can we translate that into programming? And 90% of the time, if you don't have a meet coming soon, like that first block does not need to be a home run. Like you just have to get a dart on the dartboard, and it's like you adjust from there. So it's like once you remove the fact of like, hey, this doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a really good educated guess of where they need to be. That's like a lot of times I'll take their current program, change around the layout a little bit, maybe add or subtract a couple sets from there, and I'll put my own interpretation of where they should be based on what they have been doing, right? And it's like after block one, because it's pretty similar to what they've already been doing, minus a couple tweaks, they're not going to feel drastically off. Like at worst, they're just going to feel average, right? And it's like that's a really good building block, because so many times, like early in my lifting career, like I would start people too low, and then there'd be other times where I'd start people too close to that line, when it's like, oh, by the way, I also have a bunch of questions with squat, bench, deadlift, and it's like, well, you're working on these things on an RP 7 to 8 week. It's going to be tough, right? So I just find keeping consistency and making small changes over a long period of time seems to work the best. And I try to keep things consistent based on, their training history, what they've expressed themselves has worked best in the past, and how can I put my own interpretation on that?
Yeah, that's the same way I like to go about it with whatever they were doing, especially like, hey, give me a good block that you made good progress on in the past. And then from there, maybe make a slight couple set adjustment if needed in the direction you think it's going. If it doesn't work, maybe try the other direction. If it did work, obviously keep doing that. I think a lot of times people come to coaches though, and they think you'll give them like a magical program. Like John is just going to nail this first block. He's got the magical program, something I've never heard of. And really, if that was the case, coaches would just like sell programs. They wouldn't really coach. And it's more so you're going to start with something, and then you just have to make intelligent little decisions until you slowly get closer to that golden micro or whatever you're saying earlier.
Yeah, like I said, it's like it's something where that's also a red flag. If I'm interviewing a client and they're telling me, hey, like this is the end all be all, this is the only thing that's worked in the past. And it's like, if I don't get this, I'm going to crash out, right? It's like, I think Steve mentioned this in a podcast once where he's like, I'm not a stats guy, so I don't know the exact term. I don't know if it's permutations or factor, whatever it is, right? You have 3 different exercises. You have 5 different available sets and rep ranges. You multiply all 3 of those together with the intensity or whatever, and you have millions of possibilities of what you can program someone. So it's like within those millions of possibilities, there's going to be a bunch of different things that work for you. Right. So it's like if you're coming to me closed-minded and saying, if I don't get this, I'm not going to progress, that's just not a good fit in my opinion. Right. So it's like just setting those, I guess, like expectations early on is also extremely important. Saying like, especially if you have like a younger lifter in front of you and they tend to be a little bit more radical. Right. Like I'm just going to tell them early on, like, hey, like I want you to detach yourself into like, I don't care like that you're hitting home runs all the time. I want you to have a good enough program where you're able to build your round with no injuries or minimal injuries and just be able to progress. And it's like, if you just enjoy training, you'll make progress. If your whole entirety and just being is based off of, if I hit a PR, if I hit a 5 rep max or a 4 rep max on the end of every single training block, you're going to burn out. And you're going to be that person that, made progress for like 2 to 3 years, found a different hobby. So.
Yeah, I think most, especially younger men, go through that. You're like a sub-junior or maybe like 20 to maybe just junior years. It's so easy to have like your whole identity in powerlifting, and you go to the week 4. You felt great on the week 3, then best you ever felt, and then it just doesn't quite come together on the week 4. You just like crash out, like you were saying. And I'm like, really, it really isn't that important. And even if powerlifting is your whole life, like you were the strongest you ever were on week 3. Like you're just going to make a little adjustment, make sure it comes together on the week 4. You've still got the adaptations. Maybe you were just a little beat up. Like it's not that serious. But I think a lot of the times, younger guys, especially like I was there, maybe even you were there. It's so easy just to be like, dude, all of the work is gone. I'm like, no, like you just shouldn't have overshot last week. You took the PR a week early. It's okay.
And that's one of the big things I look for too. It's like, I don't care what your age is, like, please just, have a level head, right? And I got to give a lot of props to one of my lifters, Chase Gravitt. who is a 17-year-old, and he just put up, I think, an 825.5 kg total at age division nats, and it's absolutely crazy, right? Because he has to be one of the hardest working lifters on my roster with the most to do on, like, in terms of externals as well too, right? Like, he's working, I think, like 50, 60-hour weeks in construction with his dad, I believe, or his family. And he's coming in, just killing every single session. It's like, he'll have bad training sessions. He'll listen to every single voice memo I send him and be like, all right, copy, I got it, right? Like, and it's like, he is someone who's very young, but is also able to manage their expectations towards just training as a whole really well. And he's been able to see some really nice success. He had a close miss at an 800 pull, and he's only 17 in the 93 kg weight class. So he's a phenomenal athlete.
I can't even imagine where just his pull is going to be in years, or just powerlifting as a general, because like we're having children pull basically 800 pounds now. He looks like he's made some progress since. Like, we're going to be seeing some crazy things in 10, 20 years. It's going to be nuts. The last 10, 20 years progressed so much.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying, where it's like, you'll hear a lot of people talking about like, oh, don't specialize too early, or just like make sure you play sports. I agree with that, but at the same time, if your goal is powerlifting and you want to powerlift, it's like, look at people like Chase, right? It's like they specialized early on, but it's like their head was in the right place. So it's like maybe the sports earlier on in his life were important to, you know, teach him work ethic, teach him how to persevere under stress. But end all be all, you have to be looking at the right person too, right? So if you have a good athlete in front of you, it doesn't matter if they specialize too soon. They're going to be good at what they do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's pretty common. People talk about that, specializing too early. And it's true to some extent, obviously. Like, you got to have the mentality. If you've maybe never done a sport in your life and you're super uncoordinated, like, having that background is obviously going to be helpful for a bunch of reasons. But I don't know. I just don't know how much I buy into that a ton. Like, I think it's faded a bit now, but for a while, people were like, hey, if you're getting into powerlifting, your first 3 years, like, just go hit, push, pull legs. Don't even worry about squat, bench, deadlift. Just like body build, train hard. And I don't know. I just can't imagine that's actually the best way to become the best powerlifter you can be when we have kids that are doing insane things like deadlifting 800 pounds at a young age.
Again, I think a lot of it falls to extremes where it's like, people just want things to talk about, right, and express their views. And it's like, to a certain extent, right? Because it's like, the better you become at powerlifting, you check someone's hip range of motion on a table, it's like they will look more like a powerlifter after each year of powerlifting. And it's like, if I'm doing gymnastics in between, like, I don't know how much that's going to help, right? And it's like, does having, 50, 60 degrees of hip internal rotation really help if you're a powerlifter that might just need X amount to perform and produce the most amount of force? You can't say that, right? It's like, ass to grass squatting in powerlifting doesn't help, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe if you're competing at IPF Worlds, it's like, it helps you get those calls. But yeah, I think specificity matters a lot more than people think. And it's like, take that from someone who literally sees the effect of what adding too much range of motion to someone's system can do for them, or how it will negatively affect their training.
Yeah, I think people just like to just over exaggerate stuff for sure. I've heard people that are like big names be like, man, like, if you are not doing an overhead tricep extension in the beginning of your powerlifting career, like, you're not going to have a big bench. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, I don't think the difference between someone benching 300 and 500 is in those first 2 years, they did no overhead tricep extensions. Maybe it'll help with some injuries or keeping that mobility above your head and whatnot. But I don't think it's make or break to be a high level athlete.
Yeah, I need to see a little bit more research to be convinced.
Yeah, me too. I got one more question for you. So we've kind of established how you'd start working with someone, injuries, specific athletes. But a lot of people, they wouldn't really be listening to this podcast if they were making progress. If they were making progress, they wouldn't really be too concerned with programming. It wouldn't really matter that much. So whenever an athlete is plateaued, someone's been plateaued for a while, what are the first levers you go to pull to maybe unstick them? Maybe it's adding workload, or maybe it's just technique. What are those go-tos for you?
So kind of like what we've been talking about, where a lot of the times, like, you are closer to your ideal training that you think, right? So recognize that, like, you might just do the same thing, change your technique a little bit, and boom, your capacity to tolerate loads improves. So it's like, especially if you're self-coach, the thing I would say is just be honest with yourself. Look at your own training and see, where am I falling short as a lifter, right? Like for a lot of people, it might not be anything they're doing wrong. Maybe it's all the stuff outside the gym that they're doing wrong. But it's like, I think at this point, honesty is the best thing when you're just analyzing your own training, right? And it's like, see, like if you weren't like in your own body, look at yourself from a third person perspective and see what you would critique yourself over, or even the programming. And it's like, a lot of times it's very few or small changes. And it's like when you do change things, especially when it comes to programming, do one thing at a time, right? Don't have ADHD and change like 5 different things at once. Just like change something, observe the effect, observe it long enough to the point where you can draw conclusions. Because like you're not going to get anything with changing something on a week 1 and then changing it back on a week 2 because it didn't work, right? Like everybody feels crappy for the most part on a week 1, week 2. So again, if you're going to do a science experiment, like just make sure that you let these results ride out long enough.
Yeah, I think that is incredibly important and can't be overstated. Just make little changes, especially if you had a period of time, so doing 10 sets of squats a week and you were making progress. The odds that your body just drastically changed so much that now you either need 30 sets or you need 2 sets is not super likely. Like maybe you need like 9 sets or 11 sets, or maybe your technique could be improved a little bit. And then, like you said, you can actually make those 10 sets more effective for whatever reason. But I think people just get too crazy with it and make drastic adjustments, and that's probably not needed most of the time.
Yeah. Again, a lot of it's like you do too much and then you end up getting yourself further and further away from the goal than you were before, right? It's like I had a lifter going through a very rough prep, going into Raw Nationals, USAPL Nationals. And it's like he had every right to complain. He had every right to say, like, hey, training isn't going well. But then, like, as a coach, right, like, he actually almost debated pulling out of the meet, right? And I'm like, hey, man, like, this is the time period where you need faith and just you have to believe in your own ability. I'm not here to gaslight you and saying you're having the best meet prep ever, right? I'm just telling you that you are closer to your goals than you think. And if you stop now, you're never going to see that, right? It's like 2 weeks later, he pulled 380 kgs to pull for the win in the 125 kg weight class. And it's like, at that point, I'm like, dude, you made it through one of the toughest preps of your life. There's no telling what you could do in the future if things go right. So it's like, that's how quick these things can happen. It could be a week, it could be a block, but it's like, just keep yourself, goal oriented, right? Just put one foot in front of the other and just keep going.
Yeah, I had a similar situation earlier today. I was kind of talking to lifter off the edge with like a bad deadlift day. And I was like, man, it's kind of a recurring theme. If like your lift doesn't go perfect, you just like pack up your bags and go home. And then you come in the next week and it didn't go well, likely because you packed up your bags and went home last week. So it's just like this recurring cycle of you can never put together productive training. So I'm like, even if the sessions aren't going perfect, I just need you to like stick it out for a couple of weeks or like indefinitely, ideally. And then we can actually get some productive training and get some consistency in your training so that we can actually see what the case is. Because when you're making like huge drastic changes to just the program each week by like skipping accessories and that kind of thing, it's really hard for a coach to actually tell what happened, especially when you're not typing it in your sheet and have no idea what you did.
And that's a two-way street too, right? Like the athlete has to do a good job of not being impulsive, and the coach also has to do a good job of not being a yes man and saying, hey, let me just give you everything you asked for, right? Maybe there's a time and a place where it's like, all right, this lifter is going through it. We might need a drastic approach, right? But for the most part, like if they're signed up with you, they need trust. You also have to be good at creating buy-in. So it's a relationship at the end of the day. Yeah,
definitely. They hired you because they trust you and they're paying you for it. So like you better do your best to give them results, and they should do their best to trust you. And obviously that goes both ways. Like you're saying, you have to help them trust you. They have to put in their best foot to the results as well. I think this is a great podcast, man. I think people are going to learn a lot, especially about like the injury stuff. Because like I said, you're like the go-to guy on that. So I'm not going to be asking those questions to anyone else. You're the only one. Do you want to just tell people where they can get a hold of you, whether it's for PT stuff, training, just Instagram, whatever you want?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thank you so much for having me on, and thanks to everybody that's listening. They can find me at John. I don't know how many underscores, but if you just look up John Song DPT, you should be able to find my name pop up. if you ever want to schedule like a consultation or a movement screen in the future, you can just email me as well too. But yeah, that's my info.
All right. Thank you, man. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks a lot.